Hi, 7th graders. We're on lesson 8.8, which starts on page 449 in your textbook. Our learning target is solving inequalities using multiplication and division. So again, when we solve inequalities that involve multiplying and dividing, it's very similar to solving equations with multiplication and division, but the only thing that we need to remember is that if we multiply or divide by a negative number, we need to flip the inequality symbol. So if you look up here, if we have 5, which is less than 7, if we multiply them both by -2, 5 times -2 is -10, 7 times -2 is -14. So even though we're multiplying them by the same exact number, this one on the left, which originally was less than, is now greater than, because -10 is greater than -14, so we need to flip our sign around. So when we're solving our inequalities, we need to think about that because that's what's going to change if it's greater than or less than, because it's going to either make it negative or positive, and that changes are greater than or less than. So let's look at some examples. So if we have 7y is greater than -42. So we're going to do the same thing that we did with adding and subtracting on inequalities. And really, if you think back to one-step equations, it's very similar to that. So we look at the side with our variable, which is 7y. And we know that y is being multiplied by 7, so we're going to do the opposite, which is divide, and we're going to divide both sides by 7. Now, because this number, -42, is a negative, we're not going to do anything to our inequality sign. The only time that we change our inequality sign is if this number, I should circle this one, this number is negative. But this number is positive. 7 over 7 is 1, so we have y is greater than, and then -42 divided by 7 is -6. So it has to be a number greater than -6. So just to make sure, we can check. A number greater than -6 is -4, we could do. 7 times -4 is -28, which is, yes, greater than -42. If we did a number smaller, like -10, 7 times -10 would be -70, which is not greater than -42. So therefore, we know that that wouldn't work. So we have y is greater than -6. Okay, if we have 1/3 x is less than or equal to 8, we look at the left side because that contains our variable. We want to get x alone, so we need to get rid of 1/3. X is being multiplied by 1/3, so we would divide both sides by 1/3. Dividing by a fraction is the same as, if you remember, multiplying by the reciprocal. So instead of dividing both sides by 1/3, we can just multiply by the reciprocal, which is the flip of the fraction. Because 3 times 1 is 3, 1 times 3 is 3, 3 over 3 is 1, so that cancels out, and we just have x, and then we have to do the same over here, times 3 over 1. We can make this 8 over 1. So then we have x is less than or equal to 24. No negative numbers, so we leave it alone. We leave the sign alone. Okay, a divided by -2 is greater than or equal to 8. So we look at our left side because that has our variable. A is being divided by -2. The opposite of dividing is multiplying. So we're going to multiply by -2. 8 times -2. So -2a, -2 is the same as -2 over 1. -2a over -2, well, the 2's cancel out, so we would just be left with 1a or just A. And then we have 8 times negative 2 is negative 16. Now we multiplied by a negative number, so that means we flip the sign. So A is less than or equal to negative 16. So let's practice, or let's put in one to check. So a number less than or equal to negative 16 would be negative 20. So if we put negative 20 divided by negative 2, we would get 10, because negative divided by a negative is positive. So 10 is greater than or equal to 8, so that checks. Okay? Negative 24 is greater than negative 6n. So we have we're looking at our side with the variable, so we have negative 6 times n. So the opposite of multiplying is dividing. So we're going to divide both sides by negative 6. That cancels out, so we have n. And then negative 24 divided by negative 6 is 4. Because it's a negative, we need to flip the sign. So 4 is less than n, so we're going to rewrite it with our variable on the left side. N is greater than 4. So I flipped my numbers around, therefore I have to flip my sign around, even though I had already flipped it. But when I want to flip my numbers around, I have to flip it back. Okay, 3a is greater than or equal to 45. So we look at our variable, which is 3a, divide both sides by 3. That cancels out. We have a is greater than or equal to 15. Okay, I want you to pause me and do these 3. This one, and this one, and then come back and check your answers. So if we have n is greater, n divided by 4 is less than negative 16, we're going to multiply both sides by 4. So we would have n is less than, and negative 16 times 4 would be negative 64. This is positive, so we would leave our sign. Even though it's negative 16 is negative, we're going to leave the sign because we're multiplying still only by a positive number. C divided by negative 7, this time we're multiplying by negative 7 times negative 7. So that cancels out. So we have C. Because we're multiplying by a negative number, we're going to flip it. And then negative 14 times 7 equals, negative 14 times negative 7 equals 98. So C is greater than 98. And then we would have dividing both sides by negative 5. Because it's a negative, we need to flip our sign then. So D is less than or equal to negative 6. Remember, we're only flipping the sign if the number that we're multiplying or dividing by is negative. Okay, 5x plus 25 is greater than 65. So I'm going to draw my railroad tracks. We think of this exactly like an equation. We want to get rid of everything furthest away or disconnected from our variable first, which would be this 25. So because we are adding 25, we're going to subtract 25 from both sides. So that cancels out. We have 5x is greater than 65 minus 25 would be 40. because we just subtracted 25, even though it's negative, because we are subtracting, we still leave our sign. Now we're going to divide both sides by 5. That's supposed to be a 5. That cancels out, so we have x is greater than 8. So if we check, we can pick a number. 10 is an easy number, and it's greater than 8. 5 times 10 is 50, plus 25 is 75, and yes, 75 is greater than 65. Okay, Joan has a total of $250. DVDs cost $18.95 each. Write and solve an inequality to find how many DVDs she can buy and still have at least $50. So we know that each DVD is $18.95. And we'll label our DVDs with a D. We also want to know that whatever the cost is after she buys her DVDs, she has to have $50 left over. So that plus 50, and then we have up to $250. So she wants to have at least $50 left. So that much or more, and it cannot go over $250. So if she has just 50 left, that would be fine, or more. So it would be meaning it can be less than or equal to $250. If this is less than $250, that means she would have even more money left over. So then we solve. So we're going to subtract 50 from both sides. So we would get $18.95. D is less than or equal to 200. It's a lot of money to spend on DVDs. Now we're going to divide both sides by $18.95. So we would go 200 divided by $18.95. D is less than or equal to 10 point, we'll round to the nearest tenth, so 10.6. So because we are talking about DVDs and we can't buy, so first of all, this 10.6 is telling us that we can buy 10.6 DVDs for us to still have $50 left over and to have spent $250. We can't buy 0.6 of a DVD, so that means that we can buy 10 DVDs or less, and we could still have at least $50 left over, but we will have a little bit more because 10 DVDs isn't going to take us all the way up to $200. So 10 DVDs. So if we do $18.95 times 10, we get $189.50. And then if we take 250 minus $189.50, we would have $60.50 left over if we bought 10 DVDs. Obviously, the less DVDs we buy, the more money we'll have left over. Okay, so go back and reread chapter 8.8 if you need, or if you want more examples. Remember, when you're taking your NICU quiz, if you are multiplying or dividing by a negative number, you need to flip the inequality sign. you probably want to have that written on your notes super big, or at least circled or highlighted or something so that I can see right when you walk into class tomorrow that you have that written down, because that needs to be in your memory forever and ever. And since we're talking about DVDs, my secret question, which I haven't had for a long time, is I want you to write down your favorite DVD, and we will share out in class tomorrow. Don't forget to go on to NICU. Have a good night.